My wife secretly started a blog about how much she regrets marrying me, so I replied from an anonymous account and let her confess to me without knowing it. I'm Connor, 34 years old, and honestly never thought I'd be posting something like this, but here we are. I guess sometimes life throws you a curveball so twisted you have to share it with strangers on the internet just to make sure you're not losing your mind. My wife Nia is 32, and we've been married for 6 years, together for 8. We met in college, both studying engineering, and honestly it felt like we just clicked, you know? She was this brilliant, funny woman who could debate quantum physics 1 minute and make terrible puns the next. I thought I'd hit the jackpot. The girl who could solve differential equations faster than anyone in our class but would also spend an hour explaining why pineapple belongs on pizza with the passion of someone defending their doctoral thesis. Everything started falling apart about 3 months ago, and I had no idea it was coming. Nia had been acting different lately, more distant, always on her laptop claiming she was working on some freelance projects, which wasn't unusual since she's always been ambitious. The girl literally coded mobile apps for fun in college, so her being glued to her computer wasn't new. But something felt off. She'd close her laptop the second I walked into the room, and her phone was suddenly password protected after 6 years of us knowing each other's codes. The weird part was she seemed almost relieved when I wasn't around. Like when I'd leave for work in the morning, she'd practically bounce out of bed the second my car pulled out of the driveway. I started coming home for lunch sometimes just to surprise her with her favorite Thai food from that place downtown, but she always seemed annoyed, never happy to see me. Like I was interrupting something important, but she could never explain what. Then there was the whole therapy suggestion thing. Nia randomly brought up couples counseling one night over dinner, said she felt like we were growing apart and maybe we needed professional help to reconnect. I was confused because honestly, I thought we were fine. Sure, we weren't newlyweds anymore, but who was after 8 years together? We had our routines, our inside jokes, our comfortable silences. I didn't realize comfortable had become code for dead inside. Looking back, there were other signs too. She stopped asking about my day at work, stopped sharing funny stories from her job at the tech company. She used to come home excited about some breakthrough she'd made or some ridiculous bug she'd finally squashed, but lately she'd just say work was fine and disappear into her home office. She stopped wearing the perfume I bought her for Christmas, started buying different shampoo that smelled nothing like the vanilla one I loved. She even changed her coffee order from her usual caramel macchiato to black coffee, like she was trying to be a different person. The discovery happened completely by accident. I swear I'm not some creepy husband who goes through his wife's stuff. I was looking for our tax documents on her laptop while she was at her book club thing. We needed our W-2s for our accountant, and Nia handles all our financial documents because she's way more organized than me. Her browser was still open, and there were like 15 tabs up. Most were work-related, GitHub repositories, Stack Overflow discussions, the usual developer stuff, but one caught my eye. WordPress dashboard, the married mistake. My heart stopped. The married mistake? What the hell was that? I clicked on it thinking maybe it was some article she was reading for research or something. Maybe she was helping a friend with a website. Nope. It was a blog. A blog with the tagline, "One woman's journey through the biggest mistake of her life," with this minimalist black and white theme that looked professionally designed. The most recent post was titled, "Why I Stay When Every Cell in My Body Wants to Run," and guys, I'm not exaggerating when I say reading it felt like getting hit by a truck. She wrote about how she married her college boyfriend because it seemed like the responsible thing to do. How she convinced herself that stability and companionship were enough. How she wakes up every morning feeling trapped in a life that doesn't fit her anymore. But here's the really messed up part, she was good at it. Like really good. The writing was beautiful and heartbreaking and honest in a way that made me realize I didn't know my wife at all. She had 12,000 subscribers and hundreds of comments on every post. People were relating to her story, calling her brave for sharing something so personal. Women were thanking her for putting their own feelings into words, saying they felt less alone reading her posts. I spent the next 4 hours reading every single post, going back 8 months. There were posts about how she fantasizes about being single again, about how she sees couples fighting in public and feels jealous because at least they still feel something about each other. She wrote about how our sex life had become mechanical, how she fakes enthusiasm because she doesn't want to hurt my feelings. About how she lies awake at night wondering what her life would have been like if she'd been brave enough to stay single. One post called "The Sunday Morning Ritual" detailed our weekend routine and how much she secretly hated it. How I'd make pancakes every Sunday thinking I was being this thoughtful husband while she sat there forcing smiles and pretending to enjoy our domestic bliss. She wrote about feeling like an actress in her own life, playing the role of the happy wife while her real self was screaming to get out. The worst one was called The Good Husband Problem, where she wrote about how I'm technically a great husband. I help with chores, I remember anniversaries, I never yell or cheat or do any of the obviously terrible husband things. But that somehow makes it worse because she can't even hate me properly. She's just indifferent. And indifference, she wrote, is so much worse than hate because at least hate means you still care. She described me as a perfectly adequate human being who deserves better than a wife who feels nothing. I sat there in our kitchen reading post after post about how empty our marriage makes her feel while she was out laughing with her book club friends, probably getting advice on how to work up the courage to leave me. I felt sick, like physically nauseous. When I heard her car in the driveway at 10:30 p.m., I quickly closed the browser and pretended to be watching Netflix, but my hands were shaking and I could barely form coherent sentences when she asked about my day. That night, I lay awake next to her, listening to her breathe, wondering how long she'd been feeling this way, wondering if anything about our marriage was real, wondering if the woman sleeping 2 feet away from me was a complete stranger. After the initial shock wore off, I was furious, like angrier than I'd ever been in my life. How dare she air our dirty laundry to 12,000 strangers while pretending everything was fine to my face? How dare she make me the villain in her story without even giving me a chance to fix whatever was wrong? The woman who used to tell me everything now couldn't even tell me she was miserable, but she could write 2,000-word essays about it for the internet. I spent the next 2 days in this weird fog, going through the motions of normal life while feeling like my entire reality had been flipped upside down. Nia would ask me how my day was, and I'd give her the same generic, fine, responses she'd been giving me, but inside I was screaming. How long has she felt this way? How many of our interactions have been performances? How much of our marriage is just elaborate theater? But then I had this idea. Maybe it was petty. Maybe it was genius. Probably both. I created an anonymous WordPress account using a Proton Mail email address, TruthSeeker2024, and started commenting on her posts. I figured if she wanted to have conversations about our marriage with strangers online, then fine, let's have conversations. My first comment was on that Good Husband Problem post. I wrote something like, have you considered that your husband might be going through his own struggles? What if he's trying his best to make you happy but doesn't know how? What if you told him how you really feel instead of writing about it online to thousands of people who don't know the full story? She responded within hours, which told me she was checking the blog obsessively. TruthSeeker2024, I appreciate your perspective, but you don't understand the complexity of the situation. Some things can't be fixed with a conversation. This isn't about blame. It's about fundamental incompatibility. When two people want completely different things from life, talking doesn't magically align your life goals. Oh, really? Nia? Fundamental incompatibility? News to me. What life goals had we ever actually discussed? I kept commenting strategically, not too frequently because I didn't want to seem like a stalker, but enough to establish a dialogue. I positioned myself as someone who'd been in a similar situation, someone who understood her struggle but maybe had a different perspective. The crazy part was she started responding to my comments more than anyone else's. We developed this weird online relationship where she was confessing her deepest feelings about our marriage to me without knowing it was me. Her next post was called The Invisible Woman, about how she felt like she'd disappeared into our marriage, how Connor, her husband, only saw the version of her that made his life easier, not the real her who had dreams and ambitions beyond domestic life. Reading my own name in her blog was surreal, like watching yourself in a movie you didn't know you were in. She wrote about how I'd compliment her cooking but never ask about her coding projects, how I'd thank her for doing laundry but never notice when she stayed up late working on freelance apps. I commented, but have you told Connor about these projects? Have you asked him to show interest? Or are you expecting him to read your mind? Maybe he doesn't know these things matter to you. Her response was brutal. TruthSeeker2024, I used to try. Connor would nod and say, that's nice, honey, then immediately change the subject to something about his work or what we were having for dinner. After a while, you stop trying to share pieces of yourself with someone who clearly isn't interested. It's easier to just keep those parts of yourself hidden. That hit me hard because I could remember conversations like that. I'd get home from work tired and distracted, and maybe I hadn't given her projects the attention they deserved. But how was I supposed to know that my casual responses were slowly killing her enthusiasm? In one exchange, she wrote about how she wished she could just disappear, start over somewhere new, become the version of herself she was before she got married. I commented asking if she'd ever considered just talking to her husband about feeling trapped, about wanting to make changes to their life together. Her response broke my heart and pissed me off at the same time. TruthSeeker2024, my husband is a good man, but he's also completely oblivious. He thinks as long as the bills are paid and we're not fighting, everything is perfect. He's never asked me if I'm happy, really happy. He just assumes I am because I don't complain. I've been screaming silently for months and he doesn't hear me. When I suggested couples therapy, he looked at me like I'd grown a second head, asked what was wrong when nothing was obviously wrong to him. Screaming silently? What the hell does that even mean? How was I supposed to know she was screaming if she was doing it silently? But then I started thinking about all the times I'd asked, "How was your day?" and accepted "fine" as an answer. All the times I'd made assumptions about what she wanted instead of actually asking. The most devastating post came a week later, titled "The Life I Didn't Choose." She wrote about her college roommate Maya, who was working as a software developer in Berlin, living in a tiny apartment, but traveling every weekend, exploring different countries every month. Nia wrote about how she used to want that life, how she'd applied for jobs in tech companies overseas right after graduation but never mentioned it to me because by then we were talking about marriage and settling down. She described seeing Maya's Instagram posts and feeling this crushing sense of loss, not for Maya specifically, but for the version of herself that she'd buried. She wrote, "I chose security over adventure, stability over growth, and now I'm 32 years old watching other people live the life I was too scared to choose. I love Connor, but I'm not sure I love the person I became when I married him." Reading that felt like getting punched in the stomach because she was right in a way. I had fallen in love with practical, stable Nia, the one who wanted to buy a house and have Sunday morning pancakes and build a predictable, comfortable life. But I'd never asked if that was still what she wanted. I just assumed that because she'd agreed to marry me, she'd agreed to the life that came with it. Through my anonymous account, I asked her, "But what if Connor would support those dreams? What if you never gave him the chance to choose adventure with you? What if he's been assuming you were happy with your current life because you never told him you wanted something different?" Her response haunted me for days. Truth Seeker 2024. Some men say they want an adventurous partner, but what they really want is someone who will give them the illusion of adventure while still making dinner every night and keeping the house clean. Connor fell in love with the version of me that was practical and stable. He wouldn't know what to do with the version that wants to take a job in Berlin or backpack through South America. He's built his whole life around routine and predictability. That response made me realize she'd been making assumptions about me just like I'd been making assumptions about her. She decided I wouldn't support her dreams without ever testing that theory. And maybe she was right. Maybe I had gotten too comfortable with our predictable life, but she'd never given me the chance to surprise her. The more we talked through these anonymous comments, the more I learned things about my wife that she'd never told me. She wrote about how she felt like she'd lost herself in our marriage, how she'd given up her dreams of traveling and working abroad because I'd wanted to buy a house and settle down. She talked about friends who were living exciting lives while she felt stuck in suburban mediocrity. One post really got to me called "The Life I Didn't Choose," where she wrote about seeing her college roommate's Instagram posts from Thailand where she was working as a consultant. The roommate was single, living in a tiny apartment, but having adventures every weekend. Sarah wrote about how she used to want that life but convinced herself that security was more important. In the comments I asked her, "But what if your husband would support those dreams? What if you never gave him the chance to choose adventure with you?" Her response, Truth Teller 47. Some men say they want an adventurous partner, but what they really want is someone who will give them the illusion of adventure while still making dinner every night and keeping the house clean. My husband fell in love with the version of me that was practical and stable. He wouldn't know what to do with the version that wants to backpack through Europe or take a job in another country. That hit different because she wasn't entirely wrong. I had fallen in love with practical, stable Sarah, but that wasn't because I didn't want adventurous Sarah. I just never knew adventurous Sarah existed. She never told me about wanting to travel or work abroad. She never mentioned feeling trapped by our suburban life. The most brutal post was called "Faking It Until You Can't Anymore," where she detailed how she'd been pretending to be happy for so long that she'd forgotten what actual happiness felt like. She wrote about lying in bed next to me every night feeling like she was suffocating, about how she'd started working late just to delay coming home, about how she'd cry in her car sometimes before walking into the house and putting on her wife mask. Reading that post, I realized I'd been living with a stranger for months, maybe years. The woman making small talk over breakfast, asking about my day, kissing me goodbye every morning. That wasn't really my wife. That was just a performance she was giving while her real self was dying inside. The breaking point came when she posted about being ready to tell me about Austin and ask for a separation. She'd been building up to it for weeks, talking to her anonymous friend, me, about finding the courage to end things before they got even worse. She said she'd rather hurt me now with the truth than spend the next 20 years slowly poisoning both of us with resentment. That night when she got home from work, I was waiting in the kitchen with my laptop open to her blog. I'd made coffee, the good stuff she likes, and I'd ordered Thai food from her favorite place. If we were going to have this conversation, I wanted her to know I'd been paying attention to the small things, even if I'd missed the big ones. "Hey, honey, how was your day?" she asked like always, putting down her purse and heading for the fridge. The performance was so automatic, so practiced. Nia, we need to talk. Something in my voice made her freeze. She turned around slowly, and I could see her trying to read my expression. Is everything okay? I turned the laptop around so she could see the screen. The married mistake. Really? The color drained from her face completely. She just stood there staring at the screen like she was seeing a ghost, her mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. For a moment, I actually felt sorry for her. She looked terrified. Connor, I can explain. Can you? Because I've been reading this for 3 months, trying to figure out when exactly you decided our marriage was the biggest mistake of your life. She started crying immediately, not the gentle tears you see in movies but ugly, desperate sobbing. Her whole body was shaking. I never meant for you to find it. I just needed somewhere to put all these feelings. I didn't know how to tell you. So you told 12,000 strangers instead? I was trying to figure things out, she gasped between sobs. By calling me oblivious and boring and everything that's wrong with your life? She collapsed into the chair across from me, still crying. That's not what I meant. That's not, God, Connor. I never wanted you to read those things. Then what did you mean, Nia? Because your anonymous friend Truth Seeker 2024 here has been trying to understand your perspective for months. Her head snapped up so fast I thought she might get whiplash. The look of pure horror on her face was almost comical if it weren't so tragic. What? Yeah, surprise. That was me commenting on every post, asking you questions, trying to get you to talk to your actual husband instead of the internet. She put her head in her hands and started sobbing even harder. Oh God, Connor. No. Please tell me you're joking. Oh, I'm not joking. So when you told Truth Seeker 2024 that your husband was oblivious and wouldn't understand your need for adventure, you were telling me. And when you said you'd rather hurt me now than spend 20 years resenting me, you were asking me for permission to leave. She looked up at me with mascara running down her face, and for a moment I saw the woman I fell in love with in college, vulnerable, real, not performing for anyone. I'm so sorry. Are you? Sorry you wrote it, or sorry I found it. There was a long pause where she just stared at me, probably trying to figure out which answer would hurt less. Finally, she whispered, both. And that's when we had our first real conversation in months, maybe years. Not the surface level, how was your day stuff, but actual feelings. She told me about feeling invisible in our marriage, about how she'd stopped bringing up things that mattered to her because I always seemed to have practical reasons why they wouldn't work. She talked about the Austin job offer, which was real, by the way, and how she'd been planning to take it without even discussing it with me because she was so sure I'd shoot it down. I told her about feeling like I was walking on eggshells around her lately, about how her distance had made me question everything about our relationship. I admitted that maybe I had gotten too comfortable, too focused on stability and routine. I told her about all the times I dismissed her suggestions without really considering them, how I turned into the guy who found problems instead of solutions. You want to know something crazy? I said. I've been just as miserable as you have. I just didn't realize it until I read your blog. We've both been going through the motions, pretending everything was fine when we were both dying inside. She looked at me with surprise. You've been unhappy too? Nia, when was the last time we laughed together? Really laughed? When was the last time either of us felt excited about anything? We've been so focused on maintaining our comfortable life that we forgot to actually live it. That's when she told me about all the things she'd wanted to suggest but hadn't. Weekend trips to cities we'd never visited, cooking classes, learning a new language together. Hell, even just trying new restaurants. She kept a list in her phone of ideas for us, things she thought might bring back some spark, but she'd never mentioned any of them because she was afraid I'd find reasons to say no. I asked to see the list. There were 47 items on it. 47 ways she'd thought of to reconnect with me, and she'd never mentioned a single one because she convinced herself I wouldn't be interested. Looking at that list broke my heart because half of those ideas sounded amazing to me. What if we tried one of these every week? I suggested. What if we committed to saying yes to new experiences, even if they scare us or seem impractical? She looked at me like I'd grown a second head. You'd really want to do that? Nia, I'd rather fail trying to make you happy than succeed at making you miserable. And honestly, I think I need this as much as you do. I've become someone I don't recognize, and I don't like him very much. We talked until 3 a.m. that night. We talked about the Austin job, which it turned out I wasn't opposed to at all. My company had remote work options, and the idea of living somewhere new actually excited me once I got past my initial panic about logistics. We talked about couples counseling, not because our marriage was failing, but because we'd clearly never learned how to communicate properly. We decided to keep the blog, but she changed the focus. Instead of the married mistake, it became the marriage experiment, chronicling our attempts to rebuild our relationship, to choose adventure over security, to have difficult conversations instead of polite performances. Her readers followed the journey, and honestly, some of her posts about our therapy sessions and our weekly adventures helped other couples going through similar struggles. 6 months later, we were living in Austin. Nia was thriving at her new job, working on projects that actually excited her. I was working remotely and had started freelancing on the side, doing consulting work I'd always been too scared to pursue. We were taking salsa dancing lessons, her idea from the list, trying new restaurants every weekend, my addition, and planning a backpacking trip through Europe, something we'd both dreamed about but never discussed. The weird part? Looking back, I'm almost grateful she wrote that blog. Not for the months of lies and secret resentment, but because it forced us to confront the fact that we'd stopped really seeing each other. We'd become roommates who happened to be married, and that slow fade into indifference probably would have killed us eventually. Nia still writes, but now she shows me her posts before publishing them. We've become a team in ways we never were before, not just in managing our household, but in actually building a life we both want to live. And I've learned to ask better questions, not just, how was your day, but what made you happy today? And what are you looking forward to? And what do you need from me? The most important thing I learned? Your spouse isn't a mind reader. If you're unhappy, if you're feeling trapped, if you're dreaming of something different, you have to say it out loud. And if your spouse comes to you with those feelings, your job isn't to fix them or dismiss them or rationalize them away. Your job is to listen, really listen, and then figure out together how to build a life that works for both of you. We still have our comfortable Sunday morning routine, but now it includes planning our next adventure. And you know what? The pancakes taste better when you're excited about the life you're building together.